Hello everybody, it's Litsoc, it's Thursday, and we are in the second week of term, and we're coming up to Remembrance Sunday. It's the actual Remembrance Day tomorrow. What's the date tomorrow, everybody? 11th of the 11th, yeah, absolutely. So we've had assemblies, haven't we, all week. Well, you've been to one assembly, and the sixth form have been doing them for us, haven't they, with Mr. Sebastian? And what were they telling us about? Do you know?
The different type of poppies and what they symbolize.
Yes. So I'm wearing a red poppy. Is anybody wearing a different colour poppy? No? What other types of poppies have we got? Emily?
Black poppy.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that like the Africans and other
Afro-Caribbean.
Caribbean?
The Commonwealth today and the Empire as it was, yes, absolutely. The purple one, what do you remember? Crystal?
Is it for the animals?
Yeah, absolutely. The animals, the horses and the mules and the pigeons, because pigeons were trained for the first time in the First World War to carry messages. That's why we have such a huge pigeon population today. Did you know that, everybody? I think we had a Friday reflection on it a while ago, didn't we? And of course, dogs became guardians as well, and for all I know, the cats as well, as we were talking about last week. So I'm going to start with the people that you may not have heard of, the poets, the First World War poets, who included, this is Siegfried Sassoon, okay, this is him as he was in the First World War. He was an officer. He was, although he sounds German, he's actually English, okay, he came from a family that had German ancestors, okay. And he was known by his regiment as Mad Jack because he was always very brave and did really well.
My great grandparent, he fought in the war, and they called him Lucky Gladstone because he almost died so many times.
Okay, so that will be the Second World War.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. People got these nicknames. Yes. He was lucky then. Yeah, absolutely. It's lovely to have he must be quite elderly then, in his 80s.
Yeah, he died a couple of years ago.
Right. Okay.
So.
Yeah. Perhaps even older, because my mum's 84 and she was born just before the Second World War. So, yeah. Right. Okay. So there's Siegfried Sassoon. Emily, can you hold up Wilfred Owen? There's Wilfred Owen. Siegfried Sassoon survived. Wilfred Owen, very sadly, died, was shot the week, crossing a canal, a week before the armistice. But it's these two that are forever linked. See this book here? Regeneration. This is the story of them meeting because Siegfried Sassoon edited and kept Wilfred Owen's poems that they worked on together at the hospital, and that's told in this story, okay, for Year 9 upwards. So I'm going to read you a poem, okay, and the First World War was called the Great War because so many people, it changed so many lives, and it affected so many young men throughout the empire, as you will have learnt in assembly. And it was the first war also where in Britain people had free education. The free education had come into being in 1870. There had been other wars before, but this Great War, for the first time, produced a literate, reading and writing, articulate bunch of officers and men. Okay, so and there was also places to put poems as well. There were magazines and places to publish them, and the newspapers took poems as well, which some do now from the Poet Laureate, but it was much more normal to see poetry in the in the press at the during the First World War. Okay, so let me just see if I can find what I'm looking for. Has anybody studied the First World War at school in year 6 or year 5? Yeah, Josie, yes? Yeah? So have you heard of some of these people already?
Yeah, I've also done poetry with Wilfred Owen's.
On Wilfred Owen's poetry, okay. Can you remember any?
I studied this year Disabled, and then...
Disabled, yes, yes.
9 I did Dolce et Decorum Est.
Dolce et Decorum Est, yes. Two of his... yes, Dolce et Decorum Est is the one about the gas attack, isn't it? It's really famous, isn't it? Yeah. Year 11, you remember Disabled? Oh, yes. Yes? Hannah? Yes? Okay. All right. Now... This is Sassoon. This is called Going Into the Line. At 3:15, number 11 platoon, 100 yards in rear of number 10, will move from Pommier, Redgrooks. So he's making sure that we understand exactly what the orders were. Okay. So soon, at 3:15, and would return here when? Didn't say. Who would return? Perhaps all, perhaps none. Then it had come at last. It had come at last, his own stupendous hour, long waited, dread, almost hoped for too, and all else seemed the foolery of power. It had come at last, and suddenly the world was sharply cut in two. On one side lay a golden, dreamy, peaceful afternoon, and on the other, men gone mad with fear, a hell of noise and darkness, a last day daily enacted. Now goodbye to one, and to the other? Well, acceptance that at last he'd give. Many had gone with joy. He loathed it from his inmost soul. The golden world, it lay just over there, peacefully dreaming. In its clear, bright depths, friends moved. He saw them going here and there, like thistledown above an August meadow. Gently, as in a gentle dream, they moved, unagonised, unwrought, nor sad, nor proud. Faces he loved to agony, and none could see or know or bid him well adieu. To think how oft on such a day a friend would hold his hand, saying goodbye, though they would meet next day, and now he breathed his whole soul out, bidding it span the unbridged senseless miles and glow about their thoughts in waves of love. It's time already? Now? As soon as this? Did his voice hold? How did he look to them? Poor craven little crowd of human mites. Now they were crawling over the scarred cheese, silently going toward that roaring sea, each thinking his own thoughts, craving perhaps a body that would fall, or with set teeth, pitting a human will against the world. Now every step seemed an eternity, each stretch of earth unreachable until it lay behind, and a stretch longer beyond. Would it never be ended? Crumbling earth, dry with the cracks of earthquake, dumbly showed death just trodden there, and there he lay, foully deformed in what was once a man. Lo, as these are, so shalt thou be, he thought, shuddered, then thrilled almost to ecstasy, as one from hell delivered up to heaven. And slowly, in his overheated mind, peace like a river through the desert flows, and sweetness wells and overflows in streams that reach the furthest friend in memory. Peace now and clear delight in serving these poor sheep driven innocent to death. Peace undisturbed, though the poor senses jump, and horror catches at the heart. as when death unsuspected flattens his grisly hand under the very eye of quietness. Peace, peace with all, even the enemy, compassion for them deep as for his own. Quietness now amid the thunderous noise, and sweet elation in the grave of gloom. So he's going down to his death. Okay. He's describing the horror and the noise and the cut-off between the golden years and what isn't. Okay. Now, Wilfred Owen. Let's see if I can find Wilfred Owen. So Siegfried Sassoon survived. He could have been court-martialed, in other words, declared a coward, because he wrote a letter to the Times in about 1916 saying that the government were prolonging the agony and they should be negotiating. His military commanders didn't like that. So what they did with him was they sent him to this hospital, Craig Lockhart, so that he could. They decided that to call him mad rather than actually make a big fuss about it. And whilst he was there, he met Owen and was looked after by a certain psychiatrist, a doctor, and gradually came to realise that even though he'd protested, he had to go back and look after his men. And, as I say, he survived. Wilfred Owen didn't survive, but his legacy lives on in every GCSE syllabus, in every Remembrance Sunday. Sassoon became, he really suffered post-traumatic stress syndrome, so what they used to call shell shock in the First World War, and he became a bit of a recluse. But and he stopped writing poetry and went on to write fiction. Memoirs of a Fox Hunting Man was his book that came out in the 1930s and was very successful. And he lived on his family estate and but also looked after Owen's poems. So this is one of Wilfred Owen's poems that Siegfried Sassoon worked on with him. You can see here. This is a facsimile of the manuscript for Anthem for Doomed Youth, and all these crossings out are where they discussed the text, and Owen went away and reread it, and they rewrote it, changing the meaning, making it more powerful, making it really, really effective. Okay. So this is Anthem for Doomed Youth. They're likely to die because it's so awful. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries for them now, no prayers, nor bells, nor any voice of mourning, save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. So what he's talking about is what's going to remember those who have gone to a slaughter, almost like cows in an abattoir. The guns are the only thing that are going to accompany their death. and he compares the shells to choirs of in a cathedral. He had been training to be a priest before when he was quite young, changed his mind, and then in the second verse he's thinking about candles and girls and what happened in when there was a house with mourning. In the First World War, there were whole streets where windows had their curtains or their blinds shut because there was a death in the house. Because people young men joined up together. They were called PALS battalions. And there's on the Kingston War Memorial, which is in the centre of Kingston, you can see people from the same sort of street, same area, and it's like that across Britain. Okay, each section of town has its own war memorial. Right now, where we all live, I'm in Hersham. Mine's in the our church. Thames Ditton. Anybody in Thames Ditton?
I think there's one in Giggs Hill Green.
Giggs Hill Green, there is, yes, isn't there?
And also there's one, I think at Easter Common, I think, where my mum walks my dog.
Yes,
Yeah,
there
there's
is.
one at Easter Common.
Yes, yeah, they moved it from the road to further back, didn't they? It's a cross.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a cross with poppies, rings of
All the rings, yes, the steps, yeah. Emily, is there one near you?
Well, I'm in Shepperton. I think there's one on so there was my old school, and then we had a roundabout, and we had loads of poppies and stuff remembering.
Yeah.
On our roundabout.
Yes, yeah. They always see because we have a memorial garden as well, and we've got big cross, lots of grass where people can go and sit and remember, and the poppies around the outside as well from what will be being left there on Sunday. There'll always be a ceremony at that memorial on Sunday. There'll be a bugler, like there was in Assembly, and there will be prayers said, and the King will be at the cenotaph in Whitehall, and that's broadcast on the television, BBC One, and then there's the march past of all our veterans. Because it's not just the First World War, it's the Second World War, it's all the wars that we've been involved in Northern Ireland, and it's not just the men, it's the women too. And I'm going to talk very briefly about Vera Brittain. Now, Vera Brittain was a young woman, same sort of class as we all are. She grew up expecting to marry, although she wanted an education just as good as her brothers. In fact, she fought for that. And her brother had some wonderful friends, and she became very, very fond of them. And one by one, during the First World War, they all died. And so she had to cope with the grief not only of the person she was going to marry dying, but her brother, and 4 or 5 of his friends as well that she was very close to. And they'd been an inspiration to her. She'd been an inspiration to them. They'd written letters to each other. And because they were out in the trenches, she decided that she was going to aim to get to Oxford. She went to Oxford University, and then when she was there, she'd got there, she said, I can't do this, I've got to go and help. And she became a nurse, and it was really tough, really, really tough. But because of that experience, it changed her life, and she became a writer, a worker for peace. She wrote poetry. She also wrote an amazing autobiography called, can't remember what it's called suddenly. My brain's gone.
No, I can't think of it either.
No, it'll come back to me. She wrote lots and lots of things, and eventually she married again, had a family, and her daughter went on to become an MP and a member of the Labour Party. She went into the House of Lords, Dame Shirley Williams, so she made a major impact on this country. Okay, and this is an anthology they put together about 30 odd years ago. It's quite old now, but it was the first time women's poetry was really talked about. And this is Vera Brittain to my brother. To my brother, your battle wounds are scars upon my heart, received when in that tragic, grand and tragic show you played your part 2 years ago. And silver in the summer morning sun, I see the symbol of your courage glow, that cross you won 2 years ago. Though now again you watch the shrapnel fly and hear the guns that daily louder grow, as in July 2 years ago. May you endure to lead the last advance, and with your men pursue the flying foe, as once in France 2 years ago. Now, her brother was called Edward, and she wrote this in memory of a battle he'd been wounded, and she was worried about him. But she's celebrating also the fact that he won a military cross. And then this was written in 1918, 4 days before he died, and he died in June 1918. So in Italy, and part of what she had to do after the conflict was over was go and visit his grave with her parents, as a lot of wives, mothers did, because people were buried close to where they fell. They didn't bring the bodies home. People can go and visit the battlefields now, which are looked after by the Commonwealth Grave Commission. So across Europe and across the world, in fact, on Sunday, there will be ceremonies at the Commonwealth Grave Commission remembering our fallen. Not in Afghanistan because we're not there anymore, but there will be graves there too. Iraq, Iran, Italy. I've been to see Commonwealth Grave Commission's places in Italy from the First and Second World War. So it's a big thing. Why do we remember? Why do we need to remember, girls?
Because the wars were really big moments in history, and it wasn't just a war between our country and another country. It was a whole world war, and we had 2 of them. So they need to be remembered because so many people died to fight for our country.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, because if we don't remember, we're going to forget, and we'll do it all again, won't we? Yes. And of course, war doesn't go away, sadly. We've got a war in Ukraine where people are suffering and hanging on. But what we put on the table is a sort of selection of our most different wars. Okay, so we've got classical wars, Heroes of Olympus, Blood of Olympus. We've got Catch-22, which is World War II. We've got Jack Daydream, Second World War, and a section of non-fiction as well. What else have we got?
There's Narnia as well, which is sort of about
yes, Narnia.
both, isn't it?
We've got war there, haven't we? The White Witch fighting Aslan. Yes.
Also the real Second World War, because they get evacuated, don't they?
Yes, and he wrote that in the Second World War. Okay, right, so it's up to you now. We're going to change seats, so who would like to start with what book they've chosen? Can I pick? Come and sit here. Come and sit here.
Do a swap.
We'll do a swap. Okay?
It's very low.
So I chose Goodnight Mr. Tom. I read it a couple years ago, and I found that when I read it when I was quite little, I didn't really I did understand it, but not as well as I do now, because then I read it again at the end of Year 6 when I was learning about World War II, and I understood it a lot more and understood the deeper meaning of it. So if you don't know what the book is about, it's about a boy who goes off and
He's evacuated, isn't he?
Yeah, from London, and his mother at home is really strict, but he expects that the people away are going to be even meaner, but he meets a man called Mr. Tom, and he welcomes him into his home, and it's really nice to him and doesn't let him worry about the war when it's all going on.
Yeah. Becomes like a father figure, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And Tom's grieving too, isn't he? Because
Yeah.
he's lost his wife and child a long time ago. So they help each other, don't they? Yeah. Has anybody seen the film or read it as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I studied it in Year 6.
Yeah. It's lovely, isn't it? It's a lovely story. What's the name of the little boy? I can't remember. Is it on the back?
Should say.
Yeah, probably. Oh yeah, it's Willie.
Willie, that's right. Yes, yes. And he makes a friend, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And something happens to him, and that's really sad. So it's about sort of coping with loss, isn't it? In all sorts of ways, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. And what made you go back to it?
Well, my mum said it was a good book to read, and I was like, I've already read it, and she's like, you'll understand it more if you read it again. And then I didn't think that I needed to understand it more, but when I did read it, I realised that I really should have read it. I really wouldn't regret if I really would regret if I didn't read it, because it's a really nice book.
It is. It's a lovely book to reread, even just for the story again. Yes. Thank you. That's great. Give them a clap. Okay. Crystal, would you like to go next?
Yeah.
Okay. As I do mine. Anybody? Is there enough tea left? No, there isn't any tea left. Right, okay, we've all had one today. Crystal, do you want to pass me my tea?
Oh yeah.
Because I haven't finished yet. Thank you very much. Thanks. There? Oh, no, never mind. Oh, we've eaten all the biscuits then. Almost.
So I picked two books by two different authors. It's Emma Carroll and Michael Morpurgo. I started. So I came to England at Year 4. So before that, I didn't really know about World War II and World War One. But as I came there at Year 6 and 5, I studied a lot about World War II and read these two books in school. And I particularly enjoyed these two. I read like 5, but I enjoyed these two because these are about evacuees, and because my brother is about their age and I'm about like the older one's age, and I could like empathize their feelings because I also moved. Obviously, it wasn't like during the war, but I also moved. So this book was about a brother and a sister moving to Devon because they were in London and it wasn't obviously safe, and they went into their bigger sister's like friend's house, and some kind of like spy things happen and mysterious things happen, and it's kind of miserable but also very
It is. It's always sad, isn't it? Because they've got to come to terms with new life, haven't they? And I'm sure you were the same, sad leaving your home, weren't you?
Yeah.
And coming to terms with that. Yeah. Does it get better for them?
Like in the story.
In the story.
I mean, like the sister's friend was being a bit mean to them, but they like kind of sorted it out. So it gets a bit better at the end. And also, this book is quite short because I read it at Year 4 or something. This is about two boys who evacuated and saw the German pilots landed on the hill, and that German pilot saves one of them from the river, and they like help them but still suspect him as a spy, and it's kind of heartwarming but also sad. Yes, because it was during the war. Yeah, they couldn't trust everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it's sort of a bit of sweet, isn't it? Again,
Yeah.
we can't trust them, but he saved them, but because he's an enemy. And I think one of the great things about the late 20th century and the 21st century is how much we've reconcile with Germany and how it's reinvented itself as well, and we're it's fully integrated now into Europe with France and everybody else that it used to be big enemies with. It's made a real change. Yeah. Thank you, Crystal. That was great.
Great, yeah.
Right, Emily, would you like to just want to sit back here and I'll move again. Okay.
Thank you.
So I've got 5 Children on the Western Front, which is kind of like a sequel to 5 Children It, but by a different author. And is it Samyad?
Samyad, yes,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
And like he comes back in this book, and it's in the time of World War One, and he takes the children because their older brother Cyril goes off to war, and in one part of the book he takes them, the 2 youngest kids. I forgot that. So in the 5 Children, the youngest one,
The Lamb.
yeah, and I think even younger one, she's not born yet.
Right.
Yeah, and she's like the new main character who heard all these stories when she was younger about him, and like now she gets to actually live it. And it's less about the war, but like the war's in the background of it. But it's also like plays a big part as like she wants to go see her brother. And in one part they go to the trenches, but like Cyril can't see her. She can see him and see everything that's happening, and actually can see him in the war. But the main like plot of the book is trying to get like the Samyad like back home, and like trying to. So he made loads of mistakes in his life, and like they're trying to correct it, and like he's quite stubborn and quite mean and stuff like that.
He's always been stubborn and mean, and
Yeah.
you know, don't wake me up. I want to go back to sand.
Yeah, so they're trying to go back and see like what good he can do, and try like to erase his past mistakes and like be forgiven, so that he can go back home, because he's slowly losing his powers.
Oh,
Yeah.
So he's getting old, and
But the war really affects them as well. Like it's a background thing, but
Yes.
it's affecting them. And like by the end of the book, it's like quite a big thing in the family.
yeah, absolutely. Lee Nesbitt died before the First World War started, but the atmosphere was already getting quite. When she was still writing, was getting quite hysterical with the arms race was beginning to build, and so there was all that background as well. Yeah, and it's Kate Saunders who, who's written for adults before, but this is her take on it. But you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, well, great. Thank you very much, Emily. That's great. Okay. Anybody else? Yes? Yeah.
I read this, I think, in year 5 or year 6, and basically it kind of really... So I had read it after it was recommended to me by someone in my class, and then I read it after them, and it kind of really impacted, like, sort of how I was reading it, because with other books, normally I guess this isn't a really good page turner, because when you read it, you felt exactly what everybody was feeling. So it's about this boy who is in an orphanage in Austria, and he's Jewish, and then the owners of the orphanage are burning down Jewish books, and he's questioning them, and then some German officers come and investigate, and so he leaves the orphanage because the lady says, well, it's better you leave because
then in danger.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then he leaves, and then he kind of has to fend for himself, and then when he goes around looking at what he used to know, everything has completely changed.
Mm.
And then he saves someone. It says here, I saved a girl called Zelda from a burning house. So he did that, and then he saved her, and her dad converted to become Nazi, and she was Catholic, but throughout the whole story, she was always saying, I'm Jewish, so she could stay with him.
Oh, I see. So she was pretending just because she wanted to stay with
because she
him.
wanted to stay with him, because her mum, I think, had died, so she had no other option. And then they, in the end, get taken to a war camp, and then, they kind of have to survive somehow.
Yeah.
Mm.
So it's a sort of quest, a story to go from danger into more danger and try and find a place to be safe. Yeah. Remind us what it's called.
It's called Once.
And it's by Maurice Gleitzman.
Yeah.
Anybody read anything by Maurice Gleitzman? 2 Weeks with the Queen? Anybody? No?
And there's a whole series.
Yeah, there's a
Of
whole series
these.
in there. Once, Twice,
Once, I think.
Now?
Now.
No.
Yeah.
Soon, yeah.
Soon, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You read the others as well?
I've read a few of them.
A few of them.
But
Yeah.
if you're looking for something that's short but really emotional, then this is a good one. 'Cause
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Great. Okay, anybody else? Josie? Yes? Josie and Holly's choice, yeah. I'll read it up for you. I'll read it up.
Okay, so both me and Holly
Yeah.
were gonna say All Quiet on the Western Front, and it's quite an interesting book because I'd say a lot of books set in the World Wars I've read, at least, have been from the British perspective, whereas All Quiet on the Western Front is from the German perspective of a group of German soldiers fighting on the Western Front. But I think it really made me realise how no one really knew exactly what was going on. There was propaganda on both sides, and throughout the book it starts off that they're very patriotic and are very proud about what's happening, but gradually as more and more things happen, they start to realise that it's not good for either side. And I think it's really interesting to see the shift throughout the book, and I think it also reflects, like Wilfred Owen says in some of his poems, like the shift that a lot of people found fighting in the war. The reality of the war was very different from what they were told about it. And I think it's also quite an interesting book from a historical perspective. It was released shortly after World War One, and it was released in Germany, and previously there was a lot of censorship, and so once it came out, where there was less censorship because the World War One ended with the Kaiser abdicating, it meant that the new government, there was a lot less censorship, and the book was very successful because people were really interested to hear other people's stories and what it actually looked like.
Interesting, Josie. Yeah. Do you want to read a bit? Holly, you're going to read a bit. Great.
It's just this one passage that I really loved.
Sit on the arm.
A little soldier and a kindly voice, and if anyone were to caress him, he probably wouldn't understand the gesture anymore. That soldier with the big boots and a heart that has been buried alive. A soldier who marches because he is wearing marching boots and who has forgotten everything except marching. Aren't those things flowers over the horizon in a landscape that is so calm and quiet that the soldier could weep? Are those not images that he has not exactly lost because he never had them to lose? Confusing images, but nevertheless of things that can no longer be his. Are those not his 20 years of life?
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's great. And Josie, do you want to talk about your other one?
Yeah, so it's a book called Leviathan, and it's an alternate reality of World War One. So it's dual perspective. So one is a girl who tries to join the Air Force for World War One, and so she disguises herself as a boy to try and join the military. Now, what I probably should note about the book is that it's also a little bit science fiction. That it's got an element of, there's also a divide. So in Germany, it's only machines, and there's a very strict thing that it should only be machines which are used with people, but no animals used. And then in Britain, there's a thing that they combine both animals and technology together. And they call it Darwinism, because in their world, Charles Darwin not only discovered evolution, but also how to manipulate DNA.
So it's sort of the future, but also the past as well.
Yeah,
interesting.
And so there's a girl, and then there's also a perspective of a boy called Alec, and he is. So World War One started with an assassination, and it's as if he was the child who survived, and what he has to go through after his parents. He's told in the middle of the night his parents have been assassinated, and what he has to do, and then unfolds the story.
And you liked it because you knew about the First World War?
I liked how it was a mix between historical events and then also like fiction as well. I thought it would be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that alternate reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
But for certain things, if we hadn't had the Triple Alliance, what would have happened if things had been different? Yeah, if we hadn't had the Prussian War in 1870, how would things have been different? Yeah. Thank you very much. That's great. I'm going to go back. Okay. Anybody else? Juno, yeah.
So this is one I actually have at home as well, but I forgot to bring it in. Gosh. I read it quite a while ago. So it's about a boy who gets evacuated and has to go to the country. And so his imaginary friends, so animals, come to life. So as you can see on the cover, the tiger, the badger, and the knight.
Oh yes. Yeah.
And so he's got to try and go back to London to save his sister, because he finds out that she's in danger. And then there's sort of quite a big element of actually fantasy in it, as well as sort of historical, because of obviously the war. I think it's the Second World War, and because there's this thing where he gets pursued by the Midwinter King. So it's sort of almost like Narnia with the with the White Witch, who is determined to bring an eternal darkness over everything.
Sounds like Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's sort of like a fantasy version of World War II. And he meets this girl along the way who just wants to be in with all the action, but who also gets evacuated, and she's very funny. But yeah.
Great. Anybody else read it? No? Thank you very much, Juno. That's great. Thank you. Okay. Miss Rio, do you want to finish up today?
Sure. I've actually got a non-fiction book. There's a woman who I've followed sort of online for quite a while. She's a medical historian.
Oh, yes.
And she posts some really fascinating stuff. But she recently came out with this book called The Facemaker, which is all about a doctor called Harold Gillies, who basically pioneered plastic surgery and really changed the lives of a lot of the men who fought during the war but were left with, disfigurements and things like that. It's not for the faint of heart,
no,
but it's a really important piece of history, because this man completely changed the lives of so many people who survived the war but were still left, sort of reeling from it. It's so fascinating. If you're interested in medical history, I do recommend it, probably year 9 and up.
Yes. Yeah.
but you know, this is the first time that we ever saw sort of really big injuries happen because of the bombs and things like that we'd never really seen before. So no, doctors didn't know what to do about it, and people in the world were generally not very accepting of these people out and about in a way that I hope that we would be more so today, but people had never really seen anything like that. And so this man basically wanted to change these people's lives by doing plastic surgery on them, and he completely pioneered it. It's really fascinating. But he also created these special work training schemes, especially for the men that he worked on, so that they could get jobs out of the war, because they all couldn't get jobs afterwards because of the way they looked and things like that. And he just, pioneered all sorts of surgery, including just after the war and in the 50s, reassignment surgery for trans people. He was one of the first ever people to do reassignment surgery, so it's all just about that. It's
quite
just
a gentleman. It's an episode of Foyle's War where I'm not sure it's Harold Gillies, but they certainly look at the work that was done.
It's fascinating. Yeah, you know, when someone's got burned or something like that, they do skin grafting, which is where they take a bit of skin from one part of your body and move it over, and he was one of the first people to do that as well. It's really fascinating, and it shows you that people struggled during the war, but it didn't end when the war ended. You know, they still had to deal with all these things afterwards, and it kind of goes into some of the stories of the individual men and stuff like that.
That's really good.
I recommend that one if you're interested in that kind of thing. But it's a bit sad, but it's to do with the war, so it's going to be a bit sad.
And it's the irony, isn't it, that in so often in conflict, pioneering surgery techniques, pioneering looking after people. Triage, for example, came in the First World War, where you divide the casualties into. You can see this in EPA, where there were three places: the dead, who sadly couldn't be helped; those who could wait and could. Small injuries, and those who had to be operated on at once, and they still do that in our hospitals today, and accidents as well. And that came out of the First World War, as people, as everybody got involved, rather than just the ordinary soldier or the very rich who didn't have much education. It was almost every class and every person was involved, from the women who were looking after the jobs that the men had left, and then in the First World War, and now women go into combat as well, alongside their men, the men. So on Sunday there will be, as there was at the Queen's funeral, there will be women and men soldiers and veterans marching side by side. So keep a lookout. So is anybody involved in a ceremony at the weekend at all? No? Sometimes we have guides or scouts or brownies who do that. Okay. Right, we're going to finish for today. Oh, Crystal, yes.
Yeah, but like, it's really interesting that everybody forgot about the Anna's Diary, which is also about like Jewish people.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right, we did.
Diaries,
We forgot about Anne Frank's diary. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding us. Do you want us to remind us about Anne Frank?
It's like one of my favourite books. I read it. Some of them were like Koreans, some of the books were English versions, and I absolutely loved it. And it's really sad. I also watched a new movie on Netflix. It's not new, but yeah.
Oh, there's a German one, isn't there? It's a German.
Yes. Yeah. It's very sad, but we've got a beautiful, beautiful text, haven't we, about her growing up and her relationship with her mother. Yes, and being in the attic, in the annex. Yes. Anybody been to Anne Frank's house? So you went, Crystal. How lovely. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah. She went there as well.
Okay, Emily.
You can't see her.
You can't see her. It's quite a struggle to get into now. What did you take away from it, Crystal?
So the door made out of the bookshelf was really interesting, because it was actually a bookshelf that was made for a door. And when I went up to the attic, it was actually bigger than I thought it would be. It was actually capable for having like 8 people in it. So yeah, I was thinking it is actually quite big.
Sometimes being in those spaces, you see it completely differently, don't you, when you're actually there?
Yeah.
When I was learning about this in year 6, there was this computer-generated version where people had taken pictures.
Right. So there's a virtual one. Yeah.
Of the inside, because they specifically asked to for this thing.
Interesting.
And it surprised me because the house from the outside doesn't look bigger than it is actually on the inside with the secret annex. But if you think about it, the people that were living in that building and that knew about them were really amazing people, because if they heard something upstairs, then they would have to cover it up if someone asked.
Really brave, really
And
brave. Yeah.
They risked
Unsung
their
heroes.
life
They
for
did.
them.
They did. Yeah. So was it Emily or was it Hannah?
Hannah.
Hannah, what did you think about the house when you went?
Yeah, I kind of agree. Like, I felt like in the book it was described by Anne as a lot smaller, but to be honest, if you're living in there for like 2 years, it would be very
Anywhere
small.
would feel quite small.
And, like,
Tough.
yeah.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
I read it while during lockdown in year 6 and year 7. So I felt like it was like to show that I wasn't going through that bad at the time.
Yeah. Similar, but not as bad. Absolutely. Yeah. We're very, very lucky here, aren't we? So I just want to finish with a thought about Ukraine, because the people in the east of Ukraine are under fire. They are living in basements. They're living in fear of their lives. And I just want to end today remembering them and giving them strength and hoping that they can come through. And I know that from watching a documentary earlier in the week, and also from the newspapers, that reading has become very important to them. A lady was describing how her husband, who had been in the front line, he came back and he brought a copy of Robinson Crusoe. And Robinson Crusoe, of course, as you may remember, is shipwrecked on a desert island. And she said, we had read all the books that were available in the basement, and there was this new book, and it was just what we were going through. And so literature has become very important. So let's spare a thought for them today, and also for the people who died to keep us free across Europe. And let's be grateful that we're living in peace. Okay, everybody. Thanks ever so much for coming. Lovely to see you. Thanks.
Thank you.